Night has swallowed the mountains beyond Shangan. Inside a secluded chamber, a bronze furnace breathes like a living animal. An alchemist leans toward the crucible, searching for a medicine that can defeat age. Then the mixture flashes. The room becomes white fire, smoke, and stunned silence. The chamber is not a factory of war. It is a place of prayer, calculation, ambition, and fear. The experiment has failed. No immortal vaporizes, no divine messenger appears, the alchemist's sleeves are scorched, the walls are blackened, and the promised elixir has revealed a different power. Not the power to preserve life, but the power to release energy faster than anyone in the room can understand. From that contradiction, one of history's greatest transformations begins. A spiritual search becomes a military technology. A substance first encountered among seekers of longevity will move from mountain laboratories to imperial arsenals, from arrows to bombs, from bamboo tubes to metal barrels, and eventually across the breadth of Eurasia. No emperor, general, or merchant yet sees the entire road ahead, but the first gate has opened. This scroll is not simply the story of an invention. It is the story of a reversal. Chinese alchemists tried to make the human body endure forever. Instead, their experiments helped create a force that would make walls, armies, and political order suddenly fragile. Its central drama is the distance between intention and consequence, between the hoped for gift and the inherited burden. We will follow that reversal step by step. The Daoist imagination of immortality, the dangerous mineral culture of the Tang court, the first written warnings, the Song dynasties organized military research, and the long journey by which gunpowder became a shared and contested technology of the medieval world. And beneath every stage is a larger question. What happens when a civilization discovers that the same knowledge can heal, illuminate, celebrate, terrify, and destroy? Gunpowder did not arrive with a single meaning. Its meaning changed according to the hands that held it and the institutions that learned to control it. That question will follow the invention across courts and continents because control changes faster than wisdom usually does. In the previous scroll, paper escaped China and multiplied the reach of memory. A sheet could carry a law, a prayer, a map, or a forbidden idea farther than its author could travel. Paper made knowledge portable. Now the second scroll asks what happens when portable knowledge becomes portable force. These two inventions were never isolated. Recipes, warnings, diagrams, and reports moved because paper preserved them. The information revolution of the first scroll quietly prepared the technological evolution of the second. Before gunpowder could cross borders, knowledge of gunpowder had to survive the journey. The brush and the flame belong to the same history of stored, copied, and transmitted human possibility. The first code proof is not a cannon nor a battlefield. It is a warning preserved in an alchemical text from roughly the 9th century. The author describes experimenters combining volatile materials and reports that flames burned hands, faces, and even the building where they worked. The passage reads less like triumph than alarm. That matters because invention is rarely a single heroic moment. The evidence suggests a long period of observation. Healers, craftsmen, alchemists, and officials learning how certain substances behaved under heat. They were not yet creating modern explosives. They were encountering a family of reactions whose possibilities were only gradually becoming visible. Their work mixed cosmology with craft, ritual with observation, and inherited authority with the stubborn testimony of matter. The second proof arrives in 1044 under the Northern Song. A state-sponsored military compendium known as the Wujing Zongyao records several early gunpowder compositions and describes their use in incendiary and smoke-producing devices. The document shows that the phenomenon had moved from scattered experimentation into the administrative memory of government. The formulas in that book were not yet optimized for later guns. Their importance is institutional. The Song state was classifying, comparing, and preserving ways to use fire chemically. Knowledge that had once belonged to secluded specialists was now entering manuals, arsenals, supply systems, and chains of command. Classification also made comparison possible. Officials could judge reports against prior records rather than trust memory alone. The third proof is visual and archaeological. By the 12th and 13th centuries, Chinese forces were deploying fire lances, explosive projectiles, rockets, and early guns. Surviving images and objects show a transition. First flame projected from attached tubs, then materials expelled by pressure, and finally dedicated metal barrels. So the sequence is clear even when individual dates remain debated. Alchemy produced dangerous knowledge, writing stabilized it, the Song bureaucracy organized it, war accelerated it, and intercontinental exchange carried it outward. Gunpowder was not born complete. It became powerful through a chain of institutions. Each link changes the discovery, and each link leaves evidence that historians can test against the others. To understand the transformation, we need one simple mechanism. Certain mixtures can release chemical energy with unusual speed. When ignited, they produce heat, light, rapidly expanding gases, and pressure. The principle is chemical acceleration, not mystical fire, but matter reorganizing rapidly in ways medieval observers could see long before they could fully explain. Chinese specialists had observed for centuries that some minerals behaved strangely in fire, sustaining and intensifying flame beyond ordinary expectation. Other materials were already familiar from medicine, craft, and furnace work. The breakthrough was not discovering three unknown substances. It was recognizing a new relationship among familiar ones, then preserving that observation for others. Early mixtures often behaved more like fierce incendiaries than later propellants. They burned, spat sparks, produced smoke, and could intensify existing fire. That made them useful long before anyone built an effective gun. A defender did not need perfect ballistic science to understand the value of flame that clung to siege equipment or panicked attackers. The first military logic was therefore amplification. Add chemical fire to an arrow, and the arrow becomes a carrier of ignition. Put an energetic charge inside a projectile, and impact gains sound, smoke, and shock. Attach a flame-emitting tube to a spear, and close combat acquires a terrifying psychological edge. The second logic was directed force. An open reaction releases energy in every direction. Historical engineers gradually learned that shaped containers and stronger materials could channel expanding gases outward. This became the conceptual bridge from dramatic incendiary effects to propulsion, an idea described here only at the level needed to understand the history. The third logic was standardization. A volatile discovery is unreliable until institutions can obtain materials, test batches, train specialists, store supplies, and issue devices in predictable forms. The Song dynasty's strength was not merely invention, it was the bureaucracy ability to turn experimental knowledge into repeatable military capacity. This is why the history cannot be reduced to a single accidental explosion. Accidents reveal possibilities. Systems decide whether those possibilities disappear, remain curiosities, or reshape the world. Gunpowder became revolutionary only when courts, armies, workshops, and trade networks began to reinforce one another. The decisive historical question is therefore not who saw the first spark, but who built the durable learning loop around it. And even then, change was gradual. Bows, crossbows, cavalry, walls, and trebuchets did not vanish overnight. Gunpowder entered an existing military ecosystem. For centuries, old and new technologies worked side by side, each compensating for the limitations of the other. Revolution arrived as accumulation before it appears as rupture. Imagine a Song frontier city in the early 12th century. Beyond its walls, enemy banners gather through morning mist. Inside, the commander walks the rampart with engineers and clerks. He does not possess a modern arsenal. He has a layered defense: stone, timber, crossbows, signal towers, stored grain, and a limited supply of fire weapons. The first task is not attack, it is information. Watchmen measure movement. Signal flags pass estimates along the wall. Runners carry reports to the command posts. The same civilization that catalogued gunpowder also catalogued threats. Before fire can be used effectively, attention must be organized. A fortress is a nervous system before it is a wall, and signals are the impulses that keep it alive. Below, arsenal officers open sealed stores. Every device represents labor performed long before the siege: mining and refining, charcoal production, paper making, pottery, carpentry, metalwork, transport, accounting. The dramatic moment on the wall rests on an invisible economy spread across provinces. Even the smallest flash on the rampart contains the work of farmers, haulers, scribes, inspectors, and artisans. The commander orders restraint. Fire weapons are scarce, weather sensitive, and dangerous to their users. Wind direction matters, rain matters, training matters. A spectacular device used too early may reveal its position or exhaust supplies before the decisive moment. Technology does not abolish judgment, it increases the consequences of bad judgment. Enemy troops begin moving siege screens toward the moats. Crossbow unit responds first. Their bolts are accurate, familiar, and easier to conserve. Gunpowder remains in reserve. This is the reality of technological transition. The new weapon does not replace the old simply because it's more dramatic. As the screens reach the outer works, engineers launch incendiary projectiles. Their purpose is not precision killing, it is disruption. Ignite timber, break formations, produce smoke, force crews to abandon equipment. Fire attacks the organization of the assault as much as the bodies of the attackers. The enemy adapts. Wet hides cover exposed wood. Teams spread out, fresh screens replace damaged ones. No invention remains miraculous once opponents study it. Every advantage produces a countermeasure, and every countermeasure sends engineers back to the workshop. The contest becomes reciprocal learning, with each side turning yesterday's surprise into tomorrow's routine preparation. Now the assault reaches the gate approach, where distance collapses. Defenders bring forward fire lances, pole weapons fitted with short tubes that eject flaming smoke. Their range is limited, but their effect is psychological. In a narrow approach already crowded with noise, the sudden burst appears almost supernatural. For a few seconds, confusion becomes space. The defenders close a breach, move wounded comrades away from danger without graphic detail, and reinforce the gate. The weapon's value lies in time purchase. Medieval combat is often decided not by annihilation, but by whether order can be restored before panic becomes collapse. Above the gate, signal officers coordinate a second response. Fire arrows rise in clusters, not as random spectacle, but as area denial. Their glowing paths expose movement in darkness and threaten equipment assembled too close to the wall. Light itself becomes part of defense. Then comes the sound that changes the emotional scale of the siege. A thunderous burst from an explosive projectile landing beyond the moat. The physical damage may be uneven, but sound travels farther than fragments. Men who have never heard chemical thunder must decide whether the sky, the earth, or the enemy has broken. That psychological dimension is essential. Early gunpowder weapons were often unreliable by later standards, yet they altered perception immediately. Smoke hid intentions, flame erased familiar boundaries, noise overwhelmed shouted orders. The battlefield became harder to read, and uncertainty became a weapon of its own right. Commanders now face not only physical danger, but a crisis of interpretation in which false assumptions can spread faster than fire. Inside the command post, scribes record what worked, which device failed in damp air, which range proved useful, which crews held formation. The siege is becoming data. Technology improves when experience returns to the archive instead of dying with the people who witnessed it. This feedback loop, field report, workshop manual, field again, is the hidden engine of Song innovation. The state could learn across distance and time. A lesson from one frontier might influence equipment elsewhere. Paper, bureaucracy, and gunpowder formed a system larger than any single inventor. The siege continues for days. Neither side possesses an unstoppable advantage. Supplies shrink, sleep becomes fragmented, walls crack under stones, fires are extinguished and relit. Gunpowder contributes to the defense, but endurance still depends on food, morale, engineering, and political will. The longest siege is an argument between systems of endurance, each trying to make the other fail first. At last, the attacking force withdraws or shifts its strategy. The city survives not because one secret weapon decided everything, but because many systems held together under pressure. Gunpowder amplified the defense, it did not replace discipline, logistics, or command. Yet, the memory of chemical thunder will travel. Soldiers describe it, captured devices are examined. Artisans imitate what they have seen. Rivals recruit specialists. Invention spreads not only through peaceful trade, but through fear, espionage, migration, and war. Stories exaggerate, but exaggeration itself can influence strategy, investment, and the reputation of a state. Over generations, the fire lens changes. Tubs become stronger, the rod shifts from projecting flame to directing force. Projectiles become more deliberate, metal barrels appear. The spear gradually becomes secondary and then unnecessary. A weapon that began as fire attached to a pole moves toward the logic of the gun. This transition is not a story of one culture failing to understand its own invention. Chinese engineers recognized gunpowder's military potential early and developed a wide range of weapons. The later rise of European artillery reflects different political pressures, fortification systems, metal industries, and patterns of sustained warfare, not a missing Chinese imagination. By the late 13th century, the essential principles are visible across Eurasia: chemical fire, explosive shock, propulsion, and metal-barreled weapons. The alchemists' accidental flame has become a technological language. Different societies will now speak that language with different accents. The common vocabulary does not erase local difference, it gives local difference a new and increasingly dangerous medium. But before we leave the wall, notice the deepest irony. The substance was born in a tradition concerned with transforming the self and harmonizing with cosmic forces. On the battlefield, transformation remains, but it's transferred outward into matter, architecture, fear, and political power. What if gunpowder had remained an alchemical curiosity? The world would still have known conquest, siege, empire, and mass violence. Human beings did not need chemical explosives to wage devastating war. But the architecture of power would have evolved differently. The counterfactual is useful not because it predicts an alternate world, but because it exposes dependencies hidden by familiarity. High walls might have retained their dominance longer. Armored elites and fortified aristocracies could have preserved the advantage that canon later weakened. States would still centralize, but perhaps through slower combinations of taxation, infantry, and siege logistics rather than artillery capable of battering expensive defenses. Naval warfare would also diverge. Ships had always carried archers, incendiaries, and boarding crews, but gunpowder artillery eventually allowed vessels to project destructive force across water with new consistency. Without it, control of sea lanes might have depended longer on maneuver, ramming fireships, and close combat. Europe's later overseas expansion would not vanish, but its military balance with coastal societies could have been less asymmetric. The Ottoman, Safavid, and Mughal states would have developed under different pressures. Political borders, dynastic survival, and the pace of colonial conquest might all have shifted. Even scientific thought would change. Artillery forced engineers to measure trajectories, materials, pressure, timing, and standardization. It created costly problems that rulers paid specialists to solve. War did not create science, but it often financed particular questions with brutal urgency. Their calculations would later spill beyond war, helping normalize quantitative habits in engineering and state-sponsored investigation. The counterfactual therefore reveals the real scale of the invention. Gunpowder did more than add a weapon. It changed the price of walls, the value of specialists, the organization of states, the risk of rebellion, and the reach of ships. It redistributed power across institutions. A second case reveals how quickly meanings can change. The Mongol Age. The Mongol conquests created an enormous zone of movement across Eurasia. Armies, engineers, merchants, captives, diplomats, and craftsmen crossed distances that had once separated technical traditions. The empire's scale created corridors in which techniques could meet, conflict, and recombine with unusual speed. The Mongols were not passive couriers. They recruited expertise aggressively, relocating specialists and combining technologies from conquered regions. Chinese siege engineers served in campaigns far from China. Persian, Central Asia, and other craftsmen entered imperial networks. Knowledge moved because empire compelled people to move. Historians debate the exact routes by which gunpowder knowledge reached the Islamic world and Europe. The evidence does not support a single courier carrying a complete secret west. Transmission was likely cumulative. Objects, demonstrations, rumors, translated concepts, captured specialists, and independent experimentation interacting over decades. By the later 13th century, writers beyond China refers to gunpowder-like substances and explosive effects. In Europe, Roger Bacon recorded knowledge of a mixture capable of producing startling sound and light. Soon afterward, images and records of cannon begin to appear. The first European guns were crude and difficult. They did not instantly dominate, but rulers invested because even unreliable cannon promised leverage against walls and rivals. Competition among fragmented states created repeated opportunities for experimentation, failure, and improvement. Repeated rivalry rewarded incremental gains, even when each individual improvement seemed modest or uncertain. In China, gunpowder continued to serve many roles: bombs, rockets, fire lances, guns, naval weapons, signaling, and spectacle. The technology did not move west and disappear from its birthplace. It remained part of East Asian warfare and culture, developing through Ming and later periods. This matters because global history is not a relay race in which one civilization hands an invention to another and leaves the track. Technologies circulate, return, combine, and acquire new forms. China later encountered improved foreign artillery derived from the same broad gunpowder tradition it had helped begin. The journey therefore resists simple pride or blame. Gunpowder is neither proof that one people invented modernity alone, nor evidence that violence belongs to a single culture. It is a case study in cumulative human ingenuity, and in the human tendency to apply ingenuity wherever power is at stake. The Mongol world accelerated that accumulation by compressing distance. Routes became more dangerous in some places and more connected in others. Diplomatic missions crossed continents, markets widened. Military intelligence traveled with rumor. Gunpowder entered the same web that carried silk, paper, astronomy, medicine, and faith. Connection never meant harmony. The same roads carried gifts, diseases, taxes, arms, refugees, and ideas. And that led us toward the next scroll. The road that moved gunpowder was older than gunpowder. It had already been weaving China to Central Asia, India, Persia, the Mediterranean, and beyond for centuries. To understand the invention's escape, we must understand the network that made escape possible. What can we take from this history beyond the fact of invention? First, breakthroughs often emerge from failed goals. The alchemists did not achieve bodily immortality, but their disciplined attention to materials revealed a different phenomenon. Failure can be productive when observations are preserved rather than dismissed. Second, knowledge becomes transformative through institutions. A discovery locked in one workshop remains fragile. Manuals, schools, archives, supply chains, testing systems, and trained communities allow insight to survive individuals. The Song Dynasty's contribution was organizational as well as chemical. Institutions are memory made social, allowing one generation to begin where another stopped. Third, technologies are rarely born with fixed moral identities. The same chemical knowledge supported signals, celebrations, mining, warfare, and state ceremony. Asking whether a technology is good or bad is often less useful than asking who controls it, under what rules, and toward which ends. Fourth, diffusion is transformation. When gunpowder crossed linguistic and political boundaries, it was not merely copied. Each society adapted it to its resources, enemies, fortifications, and ambitions. Transfer creates variation. The traveling invention is never identical to the departing one. Fifth, every technological advantage invites response. Wet hides answer fire. Stronger walls answer early cannon. New artillery answer stronger walls. Regulation answers danger. Espionage answers secrecy. History advances through paired moves, not solitary triumphs. Innovation is therefore a dialogue with resistance, and resistance often determines which design survives. And finally, the deepest legacy of gunpowder is not a particular weapon. It is the acceleration of consequence. A small chamber experiment became a force that outran fortresses, oceans, empires, and scientific institutions. The distance between curiosity and world power became shorter, and humanity has been living with that compression ever since. The alchemists wanted to escape mortality. Their discovery escaped them instead. It left the furnace, entered the archive, climbed the city wall, crossed the steppe, and transformed every society that learned to direct its fire. That is the paradox at the heart of this scroll. Mortality remained, while the invention gained a life of its own. But inventions do not cross continents alone. They travel inside networks of trust, profit, pilgrimage, conquest, and curiosity. In the next scroll, we follow the older road beneath the smoke, the Silk Road, where China did not merely trade with the world, it helped weave the world together.